Today is Thursday, August the 4th, 2011. My name is Clint Risner, and I will be doing the interview. I am the interviewer and the videographer, and my interview's name is Harry Kabler. In place of interview, Jewish Community Center, and I want to make a brief comment. I feel very honored to conduct this oral history with you, Harry, and let's begin. You can start with whatever information you'd like to have in your oral history.
Well, let's start with my beginning. I was born and raised in the city of Boston, Massachusetts on July the 8th, 1921. It was on a Friday. The reason I know it was on a Friday because my mother told me later on, she's a very religious woman, and I was kind of late in coming, and she wanted to make sure I was born before Shabbat. So I know I was born on a Friday. I was born in the Dorchester Jewish section of, at that time, the Jewish section of Boston called Dorchester. Back then I started kindergarten at 4 years old, and then started Hebrew school, I must have been about 6 years old. I have to interject sort of a funny story that's part of me because I grew up with it. There were three Harrys in my family, and I was raised Orthodox. And in Orthodox Judaism, you're named after some supposedly great person. And there were three Harrys, all of us three were named after some great scholar who lived years ago in Lithuania. There was my uncle. My mother was the second youngest of 11, and her youngest brother was named Harry, and we called him Uncle Harry. The other Harry was the oldest child of my mother's oldest sister, and he was only about 7, 8, 9 years older than my mother. But for some reason, his friends started calling him Tom, and the family called him Tom. Back then, we didn't get a Hebrew name when we were born. We got a Yiddish name. My Yiddish name that was given to me was Hirsa Itzi, because my full name is Harry Isidore Kabler. And I was given a Yiddish name of Hirsa Itzi. And so I was called Itzi. And I was called Itzi all during my boyhood, all during the time I spent in Boston by my friends who knew me. I'll tell you two funny stories about Itzi. I had a lot of girl cousins, all of whom were older than me, and evidently they must have been frustrated school teachers because they took me under their belt, and I loved to learn, so I was their student. They taught me to read. They taught me, things that you normally wouldn't get until you got into kindergarten or the first grade. So when it came time for me to go to the kindergarten, I said to my mother, well, I don't have to go to school. I said, I can do this, I know that. My mother was a very strict woman. She says, young man, you'll go to school, no ifs, ands, buts about it. And so she dressed me up, and we went up to the school, and I was a little hellion back then. I was screaming and yelling, and the kindergarten teacher, whose name was Miss Feely, I'll never forget her, she came out and said, now, Mrs. Kabler, she says, let me handle the young man. I've dealt with things like this. My mother was very embarrassed at the time. She said, let me take care of him. I promise everything's going to be fine. My mother finally turned me over to her, and boy, she took me by the hand, took me into a washroom, pushed my head into a sink, turned on a water faucet, and started splashing water in my face. She says, young man, she says, you keep screaming and I'll keep splashing. What's it going to be? I quit screaming. We got into this big room. All these little kids were 4-year-olds. We formed a big circle. And she said, all right, she says, we're all going to become friends, but in order to become friends, we have to know your name. And so they were going around a circle giving their names. When they came to me, I said, my name is Itzi. And the kids just died laughing. They thought that was the funniest thing they ever heard. The teacher, though, she wasn't laughing. She was giving me that. She says, all right, young man, I had enough out of you. She says, what is your name? I says, Miss Phelan, my name is Itzi. And she said, come on now, young man. I want to know what's your real name, not what people call you. I says, Miss Phelan, that's Mark. She's a young man. when you come back to school the next day, you better know what your name is. And they were very strict in those days. They were excellent teachers, but they were very strict. When my mother picked me up later that day, I looked at her, I said, Mother, I said, what's my name? What do you mean, what's your name? Your name is Itzy. I told her the whole story. She laughed so much that tears rolled down her face. That's the first time I learned that my name was Harry Kabler, believe it or not.
And how old were you at this time?
4 years old. Another cute story, when I started Hebrew school at 6 years old, went to Theta, and my first teacher was named Miss Goldstein, lovely woman. And she said, how many children here know their Hebrew name? Some of the kids raised their hand. How many do not know their Hebrew name? Well, I was one of those that raised his hand. And she said, well, tell me what your name is, and I'll give you your Hebrew name. So the children, she was going down the rows, and when she came to me, instead of saying Harry Kabler, because everybody called me Itzy Kabler, I said, my name is Itzy Kabler. So I got the wrong Hebrew name. I became Yitzchak Kabler, and I was Yitzchak Kabler, and I still am Yitzchak Kabler, all through my life. So when I get an Aliyah, I'm Yitzchak ben Reuven. Two cute little stories.
Where were you born, Harry?
I told you that.
Oh, you did, okay.
Yeah, I told you I was born in Boston.
Okay.
In the Jewish section of Dorchester.
All right. As a child, what was your neighborhood like?
Well, the neighborhood was about 90+% Orthodox Jews. Fact is, all the Jews in my neighborhood were Orthodox, where I grew up believing that if you were a Jew, you were Orthodox. It was like a shtetl. I mean, we had Jewish butchers, we had Jewish bakers, we had Jewish everything. Everything was Jewish, 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 Jewish. Fact is, the neighborhood was so densely populated with Jews that when Jewish holidays came along, we didn't even have school, public school. And yet, 9/10 of our teachers were Irish, because the Irish are the largest ethnic group in Boston. I had a very, very tough boyhood for two reasons. Number one, I had a bad father, very bad father. He deserted my mother when I was 4 years old. I had a younger sister, a year and a half, an older sister, 2 years older, and the last time I saw him when I was 4 years old, because they were over the house, there was a big discussion. I was there at the discussion, and that's the last time I ever saw my father. And it's a good thing it's the last time I ever saw him, because if I ever ran into him in later life, I would have beat the living heck out of him.
And how did your mother raise your family?
Well, back then we went on what is called Mother's Relief. And for Mother's Relief, we received a tremendous amount of $16 a month for the four of us. This is way back when a dollar was a dollar, don't forget.
And what year was this?
Well, I was born in 21, so this is 1925.
$16.
Yeah, and but fortunately, my mother's older sister, my Aunt Hannah, owned a grocery store. And so she gave us groceries at cost, which helped tremendously. But I had a wonderful mother. I was very hyper. My two sisters were lovely girls. You didn't even know they were around. Because I was so hyper, I liked to throw my poor mother up the wall, and that's why she was very strict with me, and I'm glad she was. But she taught me integrity. The neighborhood I lived in was a very poor neighborhood. I wasn't the only poor one. There were lots of other poor children there. And a lot of the boys got in trouble stealing. And back then, if a young boy was caught stealing, he was sent to reform school. And my mother had some wonderful characteristics about her. And like I say, she taught me integrity, because Boston has very, very severe winters. And she looked me in the face one day. She says, young man, I was a young boy at the time. She says, young man, I want you to listen to me and listen closely. She said, I'd rather see you going barefoot in the snow than wearing a pair of shoes that didn't belong to you. Now, do you understand what I'm saying? I said, yes, ma'am. And I think because of that, I was a straight, honest boy and all that sort of stuff. We went to school that time. We got out at 3:30 in the afternoon. This is from the kindergarten through the 4th grade, and they called it elementary back then. And we went from the kindergarten through the 4th grade, and we got out at 3:30, and then I went home picked up my Hebrew books and went to Cheder, and went to Hebrew school from 4 to 6. The teachers we had were from the old country. They were tough as nails. They'd yell at you, they'd throw things at you, but they were excellent teachers. I have to give them credit. They were very good teachers.
This is for Hebrew.
But because they were so tough, when the average boy got to be bar mitzvah, once he was bar mitzvah, they can somehow convince their parents, this is it, let me go. And so I was left in a class with just me and all girls. When I graduated, I was the only boy in my whole neighborhood that graduated. And when I graduated, it was just me, one boy, and all these bright girls, because all the boys had just disappeared when they got bar mitzvah. I was a free thinker back then, as I am now, and you know, if you're going to be raised as an Orthodox Jew, and please don't take this wrong, but they want you to be a sponge. In other words, whatever they tell you, you listen to it, you hear it, you accept it, and that's it. That's God's word. But unfortunately, that wasn't me. And I used to question a lot of things. And they used to get so angry at me, they'd throw me out of class. 3 different times, they wanted to expel me from Hebrew school. And at one time, I was told by the principal, you are not to come back unless you bring your mother with you. Make a long story short, we met in the principal's office, and the principal's name was Mr. Tumaroff. I remember that. And the head teacher was Mr. Hilson. He was in the class with us, and my mother. There were 4 of us. And Mr. Tumaroff, the principal, said to the head teacher, all right, Mr. Hilson, tell me what the problem is. What is wrong? And Mr. Hilson, you know, had a very thick accent. He was from the old country. He had a very thick English. He says, I'll tell you what the problem is. He asked those kind of questions that drive me up the wall. And the principal said, oh, what kind of questions does he ask you? The principal didn't talk that way. He talked good English. He said, what kind of questions did he ask you? And he said, oh, we're studying the Chumash. In the Chumash it says, you know, he started enumerating what it says. And what does he say? How can that be? That doesn't make sense. What do you mean, how can that be? It is geschrieben, it is written. And he asked, how can that be? And so this went on for a while. And finally my mother, she couldn't stand anymore. She stood up and she said, are you trying to tell me that you wanna expel my son because he asked questions? What kind of Narishkeit is that? And those who don't know Yiddish, Narishkeit means nonsense. And the principal, who was an intelligent man, realized it was Narishkeit. Make a long story short, Mr. Hilson left the room, and I had to take almost an oath that the only kind of questions that I could ask is if I did not understand, not that I disagreed or in any form or fashion. And so the compromise was made, and that's why I was able to finish my Hebrew school studies.
So your mother and your brothers and sisters, all of you belong to an Orthodox shul.
Right, yeah, we went to an Orthodox shul, and there's another strange thing about it. You know, all my uncles, because my mother was very frum, I became very frum. Frum means religious. And I used to go services besides going to Hebrew school. And on the high holy days, I'd go, we had a big synagogue, men downstairs, the women upstairs. It was called the Fowler Street Shul, Fowler. And, excuse me, and we had this big shul. And, but all my uncles that I prayed with, you know, in Orthodoxy, you're classified as a Kohen, a Levi, and a Yisrael. And all my uncles were Yisraels. So I assumed that I was a Yisrael. So I grew up all during my young life as a Yisrael. But later on, it happened here in Dallas, there was a Jewish professor in the University of Arizona that had figured out that the Kohens passed on through their sons a certain strain which identified them as Kohens, and that they were making a study all over the world to decide who were really Kohens and who weren't really Kohens. They weren't going just by the name. And they would ask him for volunteers. So yeah, I volunteered. And what they did, they swabbed the inside of your cheeks, and they sent it off to the University of Arizona. And the first report that came back, it says you're definitely a Levi. But the study is still on, you could be a Kohen. And sure enough, it came back, I'm a Kohen. And that's where I found out that goes on my father's side. My mother's side, they were all Yisraels. My father's side, they were Kohens. But it was quite a revelation. Let me tell you one more story that bothered me. When it came time to be bar mitzvahed as an Orthodox Jewish boy, you went by the Hebrew calendar. And whenever the Hebrew calendar came along, that's when you were bar mitzvahed. Well, when my bar mitzvah time came along, there were three of us. There were three of us that were going to be bar mitzvahed at the same time. And even though there's three of us, back then, maybe still now, you did the whole thing. Nothing was shortened. But in this synagogue that I was in, they had a strange rule that when you gave your bar mitzvah speech, it had to be either in Yiddish or in Hebrew. No English. So, so I went about 2 weeks before my bar mitzvah. I went to the rabbi of the show, and I said, Rabbi, I said, I'm going to be bar mitzvah in 2 weeks. And I said, one of the three boys, is going to be bar mitzvah. And I said, I know they're going to give their speeches in Yiddish, but I'm going to give mine in Hebrew because my Hebrew is better than my Yiddish. I know Hebrew better than Yiddish. I understand Yiddish, but I don't speak it as well as I do Hebrew. And I said, I want you to know that I wrote my own Hebrew speech. I'm not bragging about it. I just want you to know it because I also want to give a speech in English because I want the whole congregation, most of whom won't understand Hebrew, I want to give a speech telling them what a wonderful mother I have, what she's done for me and my sisters. And he says, and rabbis in those days were not like the rabbis of today, believe me. He says, nope, you can't do it. And I said, Rabbi, where is it written that you can't give a mitzvah speech in English? Never mind it, where it's written or not written, I say you can't do it. All right, I thought, as you can tell from my story, I'm not exactly the kind of a person that kowtows. So luckily, the two boys came time for my bar mitzvah, and I knew both of the boys, they were friends of mine. They gave their speeches in Yiddish. I get up there and gave my speech in Hebrew, probably very few understood what I was saying. Then finally, I broke into my English speech. And you could have heard a pin drop. In an Orthodox show, it's never quiet. But boy, it was quiet. I guess they thought the ceiling was going to cave in. But I gave my English speech, which people told me later on was a wonderful speech. And I was talking about my mother, not about me. I wasn't even mentioned in the speech. And after the speech was all over, there's the rabbi sitting up in that high chair of his with that full beard, and it's a fait accompli, right? So I smiled at him, and he gave me a look that if looks could kill, I would have dropped dead right then and there. The rabbis of my day were not nice people. The only rabbi that I liked was Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, who came to Boston as a young man, and he and I became very, very close friends. He's the only rabbi of my whole young career that ever put his arm around me. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, who became one of the great rabbis of all time.
Very interesting, extremely interesting. When you came to Dallas from Boston...
No, I didn't come to Dallas from Boston.
Oh, where did you go?
No. The way I got, if you want to know how I got to Dallas, it's kind of a circuitous route. Boston, as long as I'm telling my story, so let's get things the things as they are.
Okay.
Boston was one of the most anti-Semitic cities I've ever lived in my life. Very anti-Semitic, and it was the largest ethnic group there were Irish. The second largest ethnic group were Italians. They're both Roman Catholic, yet the Irish Roman Catholics hated us with a passion, but the Italians Roman Catholic we got along with no problems. And later on, when I was about 14 years old, unbeknownst to my mother, I started going to an Irish Catholic church to find out why in the hell they hated us so much. And yet we could still get along with the Italians. And if you could have heard the hatred that come out of the mouths of those priests, you'd know why they hated us. It's terrible. Also, it was almost impossible as a Jew to get a job working for other than a Jew. When I was a teenager, like I said, because of my situation, I've worked ever since I've been 8 years old. I had newspaper routes, I had breakfast routes, I shined shoes, you name it, I did it. And I'm not bragging, it's just that there were others just like me doing it. I wasn't the only poor boy in the neighborhood. But it had to be done. It had to be done. But then when I became a teenager, after I graduated high school, I had a scholarship, but I didn't take it because I had to work. I had to work. And trying to get a job was almost impossible. Back then, you had to fill out an application. And the application always asked your religion. And when you put down Jewish, that was a kiss of death, because that was gone. So one time, I was being interviewed by a job, and I put down American. And the man interviewing me said, "What are you trying to be, a wise guy?" I didn't ask your nationality, I asked your religion. You didn't answer the question right. I said, "With all due respect, sir, I know exactly what you asked." I says, "I'm Jewish. If I put down Jewish, would you hire me?" He says, "Hell no, get your ass out of here." And that's the way it was. I'm telling you the emes. The emes means the truth. Well, finally, and so I went to work in a factory. And I'm not complaining, I was glad to work in a factory. It was owned and run by Jews. That's how I got a job. It was run by Jews. Anyhow, finally I heard about the federal government. This was before the war hadn't broken out, and the federal government were looking for teenagers to go to work at the Boston Navy Yard as apprentices. But you had to take a civil service exam, and there were thousands of us took this exam. Well, fortunately the good Lord gave me some good brains, so I did very well. And I was one of the early ones that was selected to become an apprentice. And so I went to work for the Boston Navy Yard before the war broke out. We were working on English ships because the war broke out in '39 against England and Germany, and English ships were coming in to the Boston Navy Yard to be repaired. Excuse me, anyhow. But then the war broke out, and even though I had a defense deference, because I worked myself into, I got my journeyman's papers in less than 2 years, which normally takes 4 years, and they had classified me. They gave me a defense deference, which means leave me alone. He's an important man. We need him here. But being a Jewish boy, and practically most of my friends already gone into the service, I couldn't do it. So anyhow, Boston's a big Navy city, and so I'd always wanted to fly. And so I went down to the Navy recruiting office while I was working at the Boston Navy Yard to get into the Naval Air Corps. And I filled out all the papers, took all the physicals and all that sort of stuff. But then when I went through a review group, and they said, wait, it shows that you're working for the Boston Navy Yard. I said, oh yeah, so what? Oh no, we can't overrule, another section of the Navy. We're sorry, we can't take you. I said, what are you talking about? I says, are you trying to tell me that I'm doing more for the war, working on the Navy Yard, than I would going into the naval, and becoming a naval pilot? He says, that's not the question. The question is, we can't overrule them. But they said, but look, we need guys like you, so come back in a couple of months, and we'll see if we can things have changed, the ruling have changed. Rules are rules. So I went back in about 2 or 3 months, same thing. So I got fed up, went down to the Army, they asked no questions, went in as an aviation cadet, and that's how I left Boston. I left Boston, went through aviation cadet, I went through aerial gunnery school. I went through a lot of things, but I went through aerial gunnery school, bombardiering school, and navigation school. Ended up in B-25s in the Pacific. I was in places like New Guinea, the Philippine Islands, and Okinawa. I was on Okinawa when they dropped the 2 atomic bombs, and then after the war, I flew over Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and saw the damage that had been wrought. Even did some occupation work in the southern island of Kyushu. I got to tell this one story, though. A lot of people I meet today think that the dropping of the atomic bombs was a terrible thing. And I said, yes, it was a terrible thing. But let me explain something to you. After the war, my group was sent to the southern island of Kyushu to a town called Zashinokuma. And we were sent there because there was supposedly a Japanese aircraft factory there, and we were going to take it over. We got to Zashinokuma, there was no airplane factory, and all we found was one old dilapidated aircraft. But after a while we found out they had gone out into the mountains, hollowed out a section of the mountains, and moved the whole factory in there. Let me tell you, the Japanese were a very, very tough enemy. They had a top-notch Navy, their Air Force was top-notch, their fighting men, they'd fight to the death, they were brainwashed to die for the emperor, meant you'd go directly to heaven, and they were tough enemy. If we hadn't done that, hundreds of thousands of Japanese and Americans would have been killed before we were able to take over Japan. Because they would have fought to the end, right to the end. And I have to tell that story. Anyhow, so after the war was over, I got back to the States, and oh, by the way, I got back. It became obvious when you're in the Army. The Army Air, everybody who flew for the Army during World War II, they were in the Army Air Corps. There was no Air Force then. The Air Force came into existence after World War II. And after the war was over, I got separated at Fort Lewis, Washington, and they wanted me to sign up as a regular, you know. They didn't need me as a bombardier, but they needed me as a navigator. And I says, hell no, I'm not going to sign up as a regular. I says, this is a pilot's Air Force. Because when you're overseas, the pilots, they're the air commandants, they get all the raises in rank, you know, and so forth and so on. I says, yeah, I'll become a regular. Let me go through pilot school. They said, we don't need pilots. We got all the pilots we need guys like you. And I said, you're not going to get guys like me, the heck with you. They said, well, how about joining the reserve? Well, I've always been very patriotic, so I joined the Air Force Reserve, which was one of the best things I ever did, because as a navigator, I could fly in any aircraft. I got to go all over the world. I had a wonderful experience. I served about close to 30 years, and I'm retired from the, I'm classified as a Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Air Force Reserve, retired. And it was a wonderful decision I made. Anyhow, after the war, I went back to Austin and got my health back. And we went to live up in, we went up to Boston, you know, to more where I was from. And after there a short while, my first wife told me, she says, Harry, she says, I don't like living here. She says, I'm going back to Texas. She said, because I'm not going to live here. And I had a tough decision to make, but I'm one of those that even though my first marriage did not work out, I still would have made the same decision, because I believe that a man's first duty is to his wife. I believe that very strongly. So we came back to Austin, and which is fine, but for some reason, I don't want to go into it because it's a sore point in my life. I lost a whole year of my life because they wouldn't let me into the University of Texas until I lived in the county, till I was there for a year. So I finally got into the University of Texas, went all year round. And now, my childhood ambition was to become a judge. So when I signed up at the University of Texas, I signed up as a pre-law student. But as a pre-law student, but before you can go to law school, you have to get a degree into something. You have to get it either in arts and sciences or in a school of business. And I was one of those that used to go to courthouses and listen to trials. And it became obvious to me that when a trial that had to do with business came up, a lot of these judges were not too wise with respect to business. And so I figured if I'm going to be a good judge, I better learn as much about business as I can. And so I chose the business route. And so when I started at the University of Texas, they had a ruling there that everybody in the School of Business, and it's a good ruling, by the way, everybody in the School of Business is required to take 8 hours of accounting. It was mandatory. Well, math had always been my forte, and even though accounting is not all math, there's a lot of math to it, I found accounting to be very easy. I mean, to me, it was very simple. And so I figured, what the hell, I'll just get a degree in accounting and then go on to law school. You don't have to get a degree into something. And fact is, I even did some teaching, and they wanted me to stay there and teach accounting. But no, I was intent, because I was very involved with the law, and they had a pre-law society there, and I became president of the pre-law society, which was one of the largest groups they had there at the University of Texas at the time. And I did very well. I went all year round because I was trying to make up for my lost years, and and taking more courses than I should. Worked my tail off. But I don't mean this disrespectfully, but there are some women that should work, and there are some women that should not work. And my first wife, unfortunately, was one of those that didn't like to work. And she kept complaining about it. And even though I explained to her that there's no way in the world that we can make it on the GI Bill, it's impossible. I said, if you don't work, I says, there's no way in the world that I can finish my education. And here I was. I had a part-time job. I was grading 3 different courses in accounting, and for practically peanuts, and going to school all year round. So to get her off my back, I says, look, when I graduate, I can go to work. You will not have to work. That's my promise to you. But your promise to me has to be is to quit complaining, because you've got to work. So sure enough, I did very well in accounting. I made practically straight A's, and I applied to law school, and they accepted me, the University of Texas Law School. And that's when things got nasty, because she was thinking, I graduated in January of 1950, and she figured, well, now I'm going to go to work, and she won't have to work anymore. But I said, wait, I said, the law school accepted me, and I can now go on and become an attorney, and then maybe realize what I want to be is really a judge, And she complained about it so much. She says, look, and she made an argument that was hard to countermand. She says, look, Harry, she says, you got into accounting maybe by accident, but you had no trouble with it. You did. Look at the grades you made. They even had you teaching it. Maybe this is where you should be. Maybe you should be in accounting and not in law. And anyhow, make a long story short, I said, okay, I says, maybe you're right, I says, because you're making sense, but I'm going to stay and work and get a master's anyhow. So I got out. So in the summertime, I came up to Dallas. There was no air conditioning back then, and there was no way I was going to live in Houston without air conditioning, and that's how I ended up in Dallas. And I wanted to go to work in public accounting, because there's where you get your best experience. And for whatever reason, back then, I was looking for a job in the summer of 1950. I just would drive up to Dallas, and I had a list of all the top accounting firms, national accounting firms, and there were no jobs then. There were no jobs. And finally, one of the partners, in Pete Mark Mitchell, which later became KMPG, which was one of the big 6 of them, they used to call it, a big 5, whatever. He says, look, Harry, he said, we don't have a job. And he says, but I see, I showed him my transcript of my grades. He said, but I'd be stupid not to hire you. So I'm going to hire you. And I did. Make a long story short, I worked for Pete Mark Mitchell for 5 years. And I was working on, as one of the clients, the Texas Turnpike Authority. The Texas Turnpike Authority was an agency to the state of Texas, which was going to build. It's going to build 2 roads. It's going to build a road between Dallas and Fort Worth, known as the Dallas-Fort Worth Turnpike, and also we're going to build one between the Dallas-Fort Worth area and Houston, which is going to be known as San Jacinto Turnpike. I think that was the name of it. And so I was working on their books and working with them. And then the man who was in charge of it came to me one day and he says, Harry, he says, the man we hired to be our chief accountant decided not to work for us. We'd like to have you come to work for us. And I said, wow. I said, I'm not going to go work for the state. No way. And he said, no, wait a minute. He said, let me explain this to you. He says, we're a state agency in name only. And the reason we have to be a state agency, because we have to have the right of eminent domain. We have to have the power to buy land, to buy real estate. But we're not going to get a penny one from the state. We're going to have to operate like a business. And basically the way it works, we're going to sell bonds, and it's going to be a bond indenture, which tells us exactly how we have to operate. You have to go according to those rules and regulations. And with the money that we get from the sale of the bonds, initially we're going to build this highway between Dallas and Fort Worth, 6-lane road, and then when the bonds pay off, it becomes a real freeway. Then it makes it's a real freeway. It wasn't paid by tax money. It was just paid by those who used it, and it's paid off and so forth. And he says, and that's how it's going to operate. I says, all right. That being the case, and so, but we started off with scratch, with nothing, really, because we didn't sell the bonds until September of that year, September of 1955. And yet, we opened, now just stop and think of this, in less than 2 years, because we opened on August the 27th, 1957 is when Dallas-Fort Worth Turnpike opened. This is a 6-lane road with all these toll stations. There was no automatic toll collection equipment. Every station had to have toll collection equipment, had to be manned, and these people had to be trained. We had to get a maintenance organization, in addition to an administrative organization. And all we had was, at that time, we had a couple of engineers. The man in charge, he was called the engineer manager. His name was Mr. Dingwall, by the way. Nice, very good person. And it was a hard work. I mean, I worked my tail off. But it was rewarding because we built the road in less than 2 years. And even though it's the biggest secret of the day, it went, because we did things efficiently and properly, it paid off 17 years ahead of schedule and became a freeway, a free road. And likewise, we were the ones that built the initial Dallas North Tollway. We also built that thing over in Grand Prairie, Mountain Creek Lake Bridge. The same way, you sold bonds, and each of those bond issues had a trust indenture, and those trust indentures you had to live by. That was your Bible. That's what you had to go by. And to me, it was fascinating because every now and then I have to go to New York on a sale of bonds, and you become pretty astute in what's going on. And the whole finance end of it was fascinating. Well, make a long story short, I keep saying that, it's a bad phrase of mine, but I worked for the Texas Turnpike Authority for 39 years. And I finally retired, and the reason I retired I was into my 70s, but that's not the reason, because I enjoyed working. I enjoyed working all my life. But it became a little too political for me. And now, you know, it's been taken over by the North Texas Tollway Authority. And one of the perks that you would get as a retiree, if you get free passage on the toll road. And you know, they had these toll tags, and the toll tag that I had was a toll-free toll tag. In other words, I could ride on the tollway, and it was a non-revenue. But you see, employees had non-revenue toll tags also. While you're working, you had a non-revenue toll tag. But as a retiree, there weren't many perks, believe me, but because there weren't many retirees. But as a retiree, one of the big perks you got was this toll-free toll tag. But about less than 2 years ago, I got a letter from the North Texas Tollway Authority. They were revoking my privilege. And I wrote the chairman of the board, never got an answer from him, or got an answer from one of his flunkies, and finally found out, how true it is, I don't know, that the only ones that get free passage are the directors, you know. And but us retirees, and the thing that bothered me about it is, I was considered part of management. And as part of management, we got no extra time.
Well, you were a pioneer.
I know, but I know. Heck, I wrote the first toll collection manual.
Well, you were the pioneer of it.
I designed the toll collection manual, the first one that was used here, and I even revised the trust indentures that even these attorneys accepted a lot of my changes, because I got to know it. I understand legal language. I guess I probably would have been a good judge, but that's another point. Because I understand, I can read legal language, just like in the tax field. You know, they have their everything is in a legal language, and it makes sense to me. I understand it. I can read it and understand it, and it's really left me very angry. I've been thinking one of these days I'm going to expose him, get one of these TV, what do you call them?
Exposés.
One of these reporters, and let the world know what they done to me, not just me, but others like me.
You can do that through Channel 8 News, Harry.
All right. Anyhow, that's something I've kind of got it in the back of my mind. I'm not exactly a vindictive person. That's not my character. But
you're justified in doing that.
But I gave 39 years of my life, and hard years, and a lot of times I worked 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, never got an extra penny for it because I was part of management, see? And that's the way the rules were. And I didn't complain. I knew those were the rules. I never mind working. I always enjoyed working. I grew up, you know, as a young boy working, and convinced myself I'm going to have to work all my life, so enjoy it. And it's a fact, I always enjoyed working, and still do. All right, now let's get into what's been going on with Harry Kabler here in Dallas.
Yeah, that was my next question, Harry.
Yeah,
how has the city changed since you came here?
Oh, well, when I first came to Dallas, they talked about Big D. Believe me, it was sure as heck was not Big D. It was not Big D. Fact is, I've seen Dallas change, and Dallas has become a beautiful city. Those of you that don't get downtown much, on a Sunday afternoon where traffic is light, get in your cars, drive downtown, and just drive around and see what a gorgeous, beautiful city Dallas has become. It really has. And I know Dallas, I know it very well, physically, you know, because when I first came to Dallas, I lived in Oak Cliff. So I know Oak Cliff also. So I'm not a stranger to all of Dallas. If I go to Oak Cliff, I'm not lost. And there are people here who've never been to Oak Cliff. Never in their lives. I mean, people are born and raised here, never been to Oak Cliff. Anyhow, let me tell you a little bit about myself, because I'm very, very Jewish oriented. I've been a volunteer solicitor for the Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas for at least 50 years, and have held various and sundry positions. I was ahead of various committees, and one of the toughest committees that I've ever became chairperson of was the collection committee. The collection committee, people become in arrears, and I mean 2, 3, 5, 6 years in arrears, and try to collect money that people owed that they promised to pay. They pledged. It was really tough. But anyhow, and I still solicit for the Federation, still do it. I support the Dallas Jewish Community Foundation. I've served on many boards of Jewish organizations. I've been on the board of the Jewish Community Center. Here at the Community Center, we have a senior board, and I'm a past president of the senior board. And at Temple Emmanuel, I'm a past president of the Brotherhood, and I also served on the Temple Emmanuel board. I've served on boards of the American Jewish Committee, the Dallas Jewish Historical Society, Dallas Hebrew Free Loan Society, Kabler Academy of Dallas. I was on that board for 25 years. Beit Midrash of North Texas. This is a study group that a bunch of us started up, but it finally didn't make it and it fizzled out. And also I was on the board of the Vogel Alcove, which caters to these young children. I'm very active in veterans organizations, always been. I'm a past commander of the Jewish War Veterans of Dallas Post 256. I'm also a past commander of the Disabled American Veterans, Big D Chapter 57. I'm a past president of the Greater Dallas Veterans Council, which is an organization comprised of over 50 different veterans organizations. I support Texas Hillel in Austin. When I was in the University of Texas, I went to Hillel all the time. And I even support the National Hillel in Washington, D.C., and the so-called regional Hillel, which is mostly SMU here in North Texas. I'm a volunteer, still am a volunteer at Children's Medical Center. I do Meals and Wheels for both. I do Meals and Wheels for the family, Jewish Family Service, representing Temple Emmanuel and also the Jewish War Veterans. I've been conducting 2 blood drives every year at Temple Emmanuel. I've been doing this for almost 30 years. I do it one in April and one in October. And the reason I do 2 a year is because they have a deal where there are a lot of people that are unable to donate blood, and which I understand. And so, like for example, in April, when you give blood, it's for you and your family, to cover you and your family. There's a group plan that the blood people have. But in October, what you can do is give for someone who can't give, so they can develop a group plan for them and their family. And that's why I conduct 2 every year instead of just 1. I used to conduct for a long, I'm in charge of ushering Temple Emmanuel during the high holy days for Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, and I have to make arrangements for over between 70 and 80 ushers. And Temple, is so big that they have duplicate services, and it's a tough job. It's a tough job, but I did it. And for a while, I even conducted services. I used to conduct the guest services on Temple Emmanuel Rosh Hashanah. When Golden Acres was in existence, I started conducting Friday night services there way back in 1965, and did it up until Golden Acres was sold. I've conducted Friday night services at various Jewish, not just Jewish, but retirement centers throughout the city. I've conducted tours of Temple tours of Emmanuel for visiting Christian groups, for example. I've spoken many a time to Christian churches about Judaism when requested. And I was a graduate of the first Melton School held here, and which is a great thing. Those of you that hadn't been to the Melton School, you ought to give it some consideration. I'm a member of the American Jewish Committee B'nai Zion, B'nai B'rith, ZOA, ARTSA. I used to be World Jewish Congress, which is not in existence anymore, but I'm now the treasurer of the Southwest Jewish Congress, which is right here in Dallas. I also support AIPAC, support the Dallas Memorial Holocaust Center. I'm a member of the Three Star Cinema for what it's worth, and I'm a regular member of Temple Emmanuel and an associate member of Tiferet Israel. Right now I'm 90 years old. I just turned 90 on July 8th of this year. I still play tennis, but I still do own yard work, and I still like to dance. I still study Talmud every week. Right now it's sabbatical during the summertime, but we'll start again in the fall. And I've been studying Jewish philosophy under Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger for the last over 5 years, and I'm still a student of his, studying Jewish philosophy. And I guess that's about it.
Okay, one concluding question. Tell me about your immediate family today. Do you have a son or?
Oh, yeah, all right. I've been married twice, and in my first marriage, we had a son, and his name is Carl, spelled K-A-R-L, wonderful young man. He's 57 years old. When he was married to his first wife, he had 2 children, a girl and a boy. The girl is Kelly. She's 30 years old. She's married. Her married name is Brunneman. Her name is Kelly Brunneman, and she's married to Keith Brunneman. And they live in a small town. I think it's called not Deer Park, Deer something. It's a small town just northwest of Austin. And they have their own home, and they both work, and she's been trying to have a child. And he also has a son named Josh. Josh still lives with his dad because he's finishing up getting a master's in international business, and he should finish it up sometime this next spring. My second marriage, I married a wonderful woman. Her name was Beatrice. Beatrice Dahlman was her maiden name. Her married name was Beatrice Brunneman. She was married to Gil Brunneman, whom I know, and he and I are very good friends. And Gil has since remarried, and he's had 3 other children on his second marriage. But Beatrice and I didn't have any children. But when we got married, we had 3 teenagers between us. She had her 2 children, and I had my son. And my stepdaughter's name is Carol Dochin. She's a real estate broker, has her own real estate firm down in Austin, very successful. And she has 2 children. One is Andrew. He's up in New York. He's in the fashion business. Her daughter is Katie. It's Catherine Janine. Everybody calls her Katie. And she's working on 2 degrees. She's working on a master's degree at the University of Texas, and also a master's degree on a Lyndon B. Johnson School of Administration. And also Beatrice had a son. His name was Steve Brunneman. He's an attorney, family law. He has his own law firm here in Dallas. He had twins.
Boys or girls?
Twins. It's a boy and a girl. Haley and Chad Brunneman. And the beauty of it is they were born on my birthday. They were born on July the 8th, which is really something. And we have a very wonderful relationship throughout. When the children, we have 6 grandchildren in all. And when all the grandchildren were young, Beatrice and I used to rent a house down in Galveston every summer. And we'd have the whole family down there. And it really united the family. And every night, the 6 grandchildren, who were very talented, would put on a show for us. And it was terrific. And after they went to bed, the 6 adults, we played Trivia Pursuit. It was always the men versus the women. But we have a wonderful relationship today, and unfortunately, Beatrice was a wonderful, wonderful woman. She died of pancreatic cancer on August the 29th, 1993.
I'm sorry.
And so this August the 29th will be 18 years since she's passed away, and I still haven't gotten over it. She was such a wonderful, wonderful person. Beatrice was the type of person that everybody liked. She had a sweet smile, just a lovely person. If you ask anybody who knew Beatrice, they'll tell you what a lovely, wonderful person she was.
Harry, I want to comment on something at this point. You are truly a man of many mitzvahs, and I am just extremely honored and overwhelmed to have had this opportunity to do your oral history.
Well, thank you. I
And-
appreciate you saying that.
And thank you so much for giving us that opportunity.
Well, it's really my pleasure. It's really my pleasure.
Thank you,
And all I hope, one of the things I've always become, I grew up as an Orthodox Jew. But then, when I got out into the world, I saw that but where I lived, they were all Orthodox. So I figured that all Jews were Orthodox. I never heard of conservative Jews, never heard of Reform Jews, never heard of Reconstructing Jews. But I've always been very, very ecumenical. I've been honored, by Data, and one time. And when I was honored by Data, I accepted on one condition, that I could give a speech. And my speech was on ecumenism. And my speech was that one of the most important things that Jews have to learn is to like each other and respect each other.
Absolutely. And I'm going to close by making this comment. You have added something that is very significant for all of us to be accepting of diversity in our culture and religion.
Amen.
Thank you, Harry.
Thank you, Clint.